In spite of the late start, great to see Mulberry Pie, Sergeant Bilko, and Quinn Rankin there in the comments. Not a lot actually going on. I mean, there are some things I could sort of talk about. I guess the main story is, of course, what's been going on in Japan with the COVID-19. In particular, on Thursday night, they announced that they're suddenly closing all the schools, which directly impacts on me. So I can talk a little bit about that. But yes, it is late, and I will probably, well, we'll see how I go, but I'll probably keep it short tonight. But yeah, good to see you. And as always, remember, you can grab my attention if you just add Mark equals Simon in the comments. It'll flash orange in my comments over on the side here on the screen where I can see them. So you can, tell me if there is something that you would like me to discuss. Or ask me a question or anything like that. But yes, this is actually going sequentially from the start of the week. I will jump into it. Good to see Tokyo 503 joining. Hello indeed. Good to see you all. Another boom for everybody, and yes, let's start off. So first thing, earlier in the week I just noticed the story that the stats continue to show that people are continuing to move to Tokyo, and this is not just rural to urban. This is not just the countryside into Osaka, Nagoya, and Tokyo. This is actually even Osaka and Nagoya populations are declining, and Tokyo is increasing. It's funny. I had another good discussion on Twitter during the week of just the philosophies around this and the idea. I know that this is part of a global trend, of course, but of course Japan also is going through a huge depopulation at the moment with an aging society. And hey, the J Vlog, good to see you. Don't worry, we just started a couple of minutes ago, so the no notifications my fault. I'm 20 minutes late, but good to have you with us. So yeah, the political system in Japan is basically set up like the United States and like a lot of places that smaller, less populated areas tend to get more proportionate representation. Olivia D, good to see you. And Mulberry Pie wants to move further away, as many people do, but here we all are in Tokyo. And for a start, when most of the political representation of Japan is from outside of Tokyo, the fact that people are moving to Tokyo, it looks prima facie a problem, apart from the fact that you see the town that you're in is losing people and losing jobs, and the economy is scaling down, and there's elderly that cost more, and there's less tax revenue, and we have to figure out how to stop people moving to Tokyo. A lot of policies seem oriented around this way of somehow blocking people from making the choice to move to Tokyo, which I personally don't like that mindset. I think you have to remember, you have to kind of start from the perspective of the people who are moving, and work backwards from that. And I don't think the solution is necessarily holding on to the people in these country towns that want to go into the city. You can understand why they want to go into the city. They want to go into the city because there is more jobs, more wage earning opportunities, opportunities to save more money. There's cultural and personal, you're part of a huge network of possibilities with people. You can go start a band, you can have a hobby, you can meet new people, and you can do interesting work. These are the things that naturally, I think, draw young people, and in particular into cities all over the world. However, I think we're also in a really interesting time, and depopulation is presenting opportunities that rather than looking to block people from making a perfectly logical choice to head to where the jobs and whatnot are, I think they should be focusing instead on trying to attract people back from out of Tokyo. And I shared my view, which is there are a lot of people like Mulberry Pie there in the comments who say that they would love to move out of Tokyo and move somewhere more remote. And I think we're living in a time now where it is possible to evening all to Wai. You sound like you ate a bag of coarse sand and chased it with a glass of acid. Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit hoarse. It's hay fever season, or COVID-19 season, whichever you want to take. So I have had a bit of I haven't been that affected by it actually, and I just took a tablet before, so it's just my raspy, jazzy voice, I suppose. But thank you for asking, to Wai. Also good to see Felix787 getting supplies for the Hanami. Yes, Odie Jr., boom, good morning. Turner, right, good to see. Nothing subtle about that comment. So coming back, anyway, so we're living in an age where, for example, we're being pushed by this whole COVID-19 thing that a lot of companies are actually mandating that their companies remote work, that they work online from home. There are job interviews that many companies are now switching to interviewing people remotely using conferencing software like this. And there's a lot of reasons why not every kind of job. There are many jobs that you can't do remotely or that are more difficult to do remotely, including this problem we're going to discuss later on, that when you force people, for example, to stay home, as happened in Obihiro, where when they closed all the schools up in Hokkaido, a lot of the nurses who worked in hospitals stayed home, and that forced hospitals to close. So you have to sort of think things through. But as we are getting better infrastructure, particularly information infrastructure, one, there's the idea that you have to be working in person in an open plan office is certainly disappearing. On top of that, there is an opportunity for politicians to do something about this. The first thing is that you should be able to get Tokyo oriented, high wage earning jobs, and you should be able to have the benefit of the lower cost of living of smaller towns. The problem is that while Japan is full of these akiya, of these houses that are unoccupied, basically these ghost towns are full of empty properties. The problem is that right now there isn't really a very good mechanism for making those properties available if there's no one to claim them, or if someone sits on them and doesn't use them and leaves them dilapidated. A lot of countries actually have laws that have policies around this that allow local councils to reclaim land and pay mandatory compensation to people when a house is unoccupied. Nobody likes to have rows of empty houses in neighborhoods. And there's an opportunity here. One, if they could make those houses available, of course, you'd have much, much cheaper housing than you get in Tokyo. The other thing is that, of course, you could actually reclaim those and make them lifestyle enhancing. You have extra public facilities, parks, swimming pools, things that improve the quality of life in those smaller towns, which you can't do in Tokyo because Tokyo is still building up. Or you can do it in Tokyo with tax money. But again, I think there's opportunities to do things to take advantage of depopulation and to leverage it to attract people from Tokyo. And the government could be doing a lot more to do that. Rather than focusing on blocking people from leaving, they should be trying to attract people from Tokyo to come back into those towns. However, the very strong trend, of course, that people are leaving Tokyo and leaving the rest of Japan and coming to Tokyo is continuing. And why not? Tokyo is awesome. That's why I'm here and I've got a show about it. Very good to see Believe in Yourself also here. And Barringer, Lysander 45, great to see you. The hilarious part of the panic buying on the Chinese mainland is that you never saw any panic buying. I only heard about it happening in Hong Kong. By the way, I haven't really seen panic buying here either. I have noticed that face masks have become harder to buy. The toilet paper thing is ridiculous. I haven't tried to buy toilet paper since it happened. We keep a lot of stock here, but it's ridiculous. If it's happening, and it shouldn't be happening. James Kelly, by the way, I didn't spot you there. Good to see that you are there in the comments as well. Panic buying in New Zealand too, is that really? There's not even like one person in New Zealand who's even caught it and they already have panic buying? That's ridiculous. Anyway, but good to see Believe in Yourself. Thank you for the hello there. And that is the first story that we have to cover this week. Second one, this was an interesting one. In fact, let me just check. Did I include... I didn't include a story that I actually swatted up for that I meant to include, so I'll come to that in a moment as well. In fact, let's come back here before we get into the COVID-19 things. One thing that came up this week was the anniversary of the 226 incident. I don't actually talk much about history or anything like that, and I must confess, a lot of these, China does the same thing, by the way. They have these holidays which are based on the month and date of the incident, and everyone sort of seems to know it so well that they just don't explain it ever. And 226 is a really significant historical incident or event in Japanese history, but it's never very well explained, I find. I think it's not explained for a combination of people learning it in school to some extent, and also the fact that, frankly, the memory is still relatively fresh. It was like 84 years ago this year. It's worthwhile. I was actually going through trying to figure out what was the 226. I knew it was something to do with an event where there was kind of an unsuccessful, well, it ended up being quasi-successful military coup in Tokyo. And I must admit, I watched a couple of documentaries about this, and I actually saw like one of the people. For some reason, there were people at the time that were recording or the phone exchange calls that were coming from the coup plotters when they took over most of central Tokyo. And some of the people who were involved in the events there at the time were actually, I used to live right beside one of the houses in Komaba in Meguro ward where they lived. So I saw my old house like on this documentary, which is cool, that it kind of brought to home. It wasn't that long ago. But it also brought to home as well when seeing a couple of documentaries on the context of just about how different things sort of were at that time. So it was really fascinating, and since I don't have a lot of topics, I'll share a little bit of it. So 1936, up until 1936, and really between 1860 and basically 1930, during that time period, Japan went through this effectively, where opening up to the rest of the world, going from being a samurai, top-notch sword-carrying sort of society to a very Western, very modernized, actually became militarily capable of defeating the Russian army by 1900. So, it militarized very quickly, and they went out and sent people around the world to go and learn and bring science. I mean, this was effectively not unlike Westerners coming to New Zealand, and Maori suddenly modernizing as well. This was kind of like the aliens landing, and it has to be said the Japanese adapted very, very well, in some ways too well. But of course the background to this whole military coup incident was, as part of Japan's rapid modernization, it went and pretty much just started copying and translating what's the Constitution of Prussia, what's the criminal code of England, what are the dress standards of Austria, they brought it all into Japan and they just converted it straight up. Part of this was Japan was actually a sort of a thriving Western style. They basically adopted Western culture wholesale, including American style capitalism, including democracy. They had a European style imperial constitution with a royal family and an elected parliament, and an aristocracy, which was a carryover as well from the feudal period. And basically everybody took their samurai clothes and they switched them for sort of Western clothes. But they were still very much in the middle of this transition, and what happened was the economy boomed. The wealthy aristocracy, as well as the new capitalists of Japan, the owners of the founders of the Zaibatsu, the large conglomerate companies, became fabulously wealthy. Also Tokyo, we talk about what I was just talking about before, the resentment and the gap between rural Japan and Tokyo. All of the power, all of the wealth was all concentrated within Tokyo, and yet as Tokyo sort of rushed ahead with this sort of sudden industrial revolution and the sort of economic revolution, and indeed which was also matched by Japan's rapid growth in military prowess, it wasn't matched by the poverty that still existed in much of Japan and not very far away from Tokyo. And this was particularly the case in Tohoku and northeast Honshu, like north, basically where Fukushima and Niigata and those sort of places are. What became really apparent during the 1920s, and particularly after the stock market crash in the late 1920s, in the economic sort of collapse of Japan, was there was a really great resentment. There was another problem that happened during this period as well. Japan was used to, everybody would have like 10 or 12 kids, a lot like England did like in the 19th century. And when medicine and science and everything suddenly improved in Japan, and the mortality rate of kids went from being, it'd be like your 3 kids would survive childhood to all of them surviving. There was a huge overpopulation issue, as well as this huge, big difference in growth. Another problem was that now that Japanese farmers were selling on international markets, it meant that when the commodities markets, when wheat and rice and so on, when the prices of those fluctuated, there were famines. Apparently in the 1920s there were famines within Japan, while at the same time people in Tokyo were richer than they had ever been before. So basically these sort of poor parts of Japan, they really often did 2 things. One, if they had daughters, especially they had too many kids, and they couldn't feed them all, they would sell the daughters into prostitution and send them off to Tokyo to earn money and basically sell them into human trafficking. And this was a problem, that certainly we hear a lot about comfort women and that culture, but this was a problem within Japan, that this would happen with the women. And the men were sent off to the military quite often. And so you had this problem that you had this whole set of circumstances meant that in the 20s and 30s there was a big rise in communism and socialism in Japan, but there was also a rise in people who didn't see the benefits of westernization. In fact, they had seen this loss of benefit, where this rapid industrialization and westernization of Japan had actually left them worse off in rural areas than they remembered in living memory under the feudal period, and they wanted to go back to an extreme sort of fascistic, but basically sort of return to sort of martial period. And so, a number of people from within the Japanese military, young officers who were basically predominantly from these areas that had just had famines and were sort of basically saw the economic mismanagement of Japan and the disparity of wealthy and poor, particularly in northeastern Japan, as being the result of corruption from wealthy zaibatsu owners and aristocracy in Tokyo, basically keeping money for themselves at their expense. They saw this as the result of westernization, of following the West, and of corruption, and they felt that although that this was basically the democratic system and this whole Western model for running Japan had failed, and so they took it upon themselves in 1936 to attempt to take over the government and reinstate basically a nation that was ruled directly by the emperor, without democratic institutions and without politicians, simply with the military acting like the samurai class, as the warrior class that would resume ruling Japan in the old way. This was 1,400 soldiers within Japanese military decided this was a good idea, and all at once on a snowy day on February 26th, which was this week in 1936, they marched in and they took over a whole bunch of government offices all over different parts of Tokyo, including immediately killing a number of Japanese government ministers. In terms of how it all ended up, this ended up being a siege that lasted for 3 days. On the second day, the emperor issued a statement that he rejected these officers who were doing this whole thing in his name. He said these are mutineers. They're not acting in his wishes or interests. So the regular police and military basically circled off Tokyo. In Tokyo, they shut down all train lines, all roads, all communications. There was a 3 or 4 day siege, and eventually the mutineers, the coup d'etat people, basically all turned themselves in, and a number of them were executed. Some of them resumed normal military sort of duties. But what happened after this was basically although the coup itself failed, it resulted in perceived moderate military people taking over power from aristocracy within the Japanese government. And essentially this is what tipped the balance into Japan becoming sort of militarily dominated. There was sort of a recognition at the power center that if they didn't give some concessions towards the military, that this was going to happen again, and that all the civilian politicians were going to be killed. And this is what led to the government of Hideki Tojo and the sort of young military officers that led to this enhanced expansionism and eventually World War II. So it was really interesting watching a bunch of these documentaries. What's funny to me is it still seems so far away in many ways, this time period, but the conditions that led to this, what's really interesting is, one, it's founded on the long-standing resentment that the rest of the country often feels towards Tokyo as being detached and somehow taking advantage of them. The second thing is that this was triggered by an industrial, more or less by Japan's modernization and industrial revolution. But thank you to Waiwai. That's kind of what's happening again right now all over the world with automation. Basically, you're seeing rich companies becoming fabulously wealthier, while poor people getting, we've had all these economic crises where people have lost their houses and so on, and basically, the disparity between wealthy and poor is now going like this, and it's accelerating. Because of this new sort of industrial revolution that we're moving into, the impact of which is not as marked in Japan as it is in other countries. But we're in this sort of time where this issue that I was talking about before, people keep moving to Tokyo, it's actually, there are parallels. Japan is a really extreme case, and remember, Japan was going through such dramatic cultural change at that time. It seemed perfectly plausible, the idea of going back to, the idea of the military running the country directly at the orders of the emperor was as radical as democracy or, wearing Western clothes was at that time. They were very open to new ideas. But it was generated by this sort of situation of inequality. and given that we're going into an age of new inequality, it would seem at the moment it's super interesting anyway. So that happened this week, February 26th, and a lot of the people were either alive or have just started to pass away. But yes, that's pretty interesting anyway. So, does he have coronavirus? I do not have coronavirus, but thank you for asking, Mr. Kulichep. By the way, coronavirus is a cold. I wish people would stop calling it that. COVID-19 is the specific one that everyone is worried about, but Odie Jr., I was wondering, why was your comment flagged? And now I see why it was flagged. However, I approved it because I'm just that kind of a guy. So anyway, you may see that while in Italy the numbers are skyrocketing, and in Hong Kong the numbers are skyrocketing, and in South Korea the numbers are skyrocketing, and they're not really skyrocketing in America or Japan. And it's kind of funny. On the one hand, it gives the appearance that, oh, well, Japan's just doing a better job than Korea of managing everything, which is certainly one way of looking at it. However, another way of looking at it is that in Japan, there's a lot of attention being drawn to the fact this week that even when people were seeking treatment for, pneumonia that had been triggered by a cold that was resulting in a high fever that was not responding to treatment, and the doctors felt that this was showing clear symptoms of COVID-19 and wanting to go to the National Testing Authority to go and get this tested. The National Testing Authority has been rejecting giving tests to any patients who either have not traveled to an infected region in China recently or have had no contact with those sort of people. Now, it's already clear there are cases in Japan where community spread. The disease is already clearly spreading on its own within Japan. And yet Japan is not actually testing people, even where doctors believe that they have it and they want to test. The doctors themselves are being rejected from testing. The reason for this is that Japan has really limited resources to be able to perform testing. They can theoretically do up to 3,000 tests per day. However, because of the handling procedures and bureaucracy associated with the testing procedure, they only achieve a maximum half of that. And in the very beginning, that was all taken up by the cruise liner ship that had like 3,500 people on it. So basically, right now, even if you want to get tested, in fact, even if you have a doctor, even if you are dying in hospital of pneumonia and you have a doctor that is sure that you have it, they won't test you for it unless you can demonstrate that you hugged at length somebody from Wuhan or you visited Wuhan or something like that. So Japan is just not testing. So the numbers are low. There's like 37 people in Tokyo, 70 in Hokkaido's the worst at the moment. They just declared a state of emergency up there. But, Hokkaido's big, Tokyo's small. Only 30 people in a 30 million person city. It's still pretty moderate in terms of numbers. However, these are the numbers of people who have been tested and proved when right now a lot of people are getting very aggravated, but that the government is not testing people or making testing available. In Korea, by contrast, they're testing like 20,000 people per day, and you can actually go through drive-thrus to get tested there. They offer it to anybody, so they're showing bigger numbers, but at the same time they're testing a lot more. I've seen some news stories that actually suggest that the cases that have come up in the United States, including I believe the first fatal case recently, like in Washington State and Oregon State, the people have apparently I've read the analysis of the disease that these people have implied that it had mutated multiple times since arriving in America, i.e. it was spreading, and it just wasn't getting picked up. People were not going in for medical treatment or getting tested, and it didn't really get confirmed until somebody was dead. Which implies either, well, one or two things in the US as well, either that the government's not really testing enough and that there are actually many more people that have it than the statistics say, or that most people are just getting it as a normal cold and the symptoms are not serious enough that people are bothering to get properly checked, or doctors are not diagnosing it that way. And this is flu, cold, hay fever season here in Tokyo. So it's entirely possible actually. I mean, geez, I had a bit of hay fever last week. That could have been it. I didn't get a fever, but some people don't get fevers. So, maybe I had it. Everyone I know has had hay fever or a cold or something in the last few weeks. So it's been definitely, I don't know, in terms of, and of course the rates of complication and severity, at least below 50s. 50s and above, or people with pre-existing conditions, it is dangerous, and certainly when it gets above 50, 60, 70, the fatality rates are actually alarmingly high. It almost starts to look like SARS. But yeah, it's not really clear if it's really spreading broadly or not. It looks like it's kind of quasi under control, and you might ask, if there's only 30 people that have it in Tokyo and 6 people that have it in Osaka or whatever, why did the government decide to close every school in the country this week? And again, there's speculation that the government itself knows that it's not testing everybody, and that it's probably going around and the numbers probably are higher. But getting accurate numbers would just panic everybody anyway. And really, Japan's doing about as much as a democracy can do. They can't lock everybody in their apartments and threaten to arrest them like they can do in China for the same thing. So yeah, it's interesting to watch, and I think it kind of is what it is. But yeah, that's what's been going on, and certainly the numbers being low. Oh, the other thing about America, by the way, which I was going to say, apparently in America, I saw a Japanese tweet about this yesterday. Japan is keeping the numbers low, arguably by just rejecting people who are, including doctors, from testing it, and not having a sufficient capacity to test all the people to figure out if they have it or not. In America, apparently the test costs $3,200 and something dollars. So hence America has hardly any COVID-19 cases. I guess if you've got good insurance, they might pay for it. But if it costs that much, well, if you're poor, it means that you can't catch it because they'll never diagnose it because you won't be able to afford the test. So there you go. Aaron, indeed, I also hope everyone can get through this economically. Well, that's a good point, actually, that it's affecting businesses and a whole bunch of stuff. It is going to, certainly, it probably is already causing a bit of a mini recession, and we'll get onto that in a little bit. But yes, Quint Ranked, if COVID-19 is a cold, then shingles is just a rash. By the way, I have a very layman's understanding, so you can correct me on this if I'm wrong. I'm certainly open to being wrong, but as I understand, what we call the common cold, there is no single disease that causes the cold. The cold is a whole bunch of little viruses of different sorts, and the whole story about, there's no cure for the common cold, because the common cold is not common. It's a whole bunch of diseases, but overwhelmingly, coronavirus is a family of disease that most commonly presents in people as colds. From what I understand, it doesn't. It can lead to complications that include pneumonia. And there are bad colds and good colds, and there are colds that can be treated, and some that just can't. That you just have to wait out, as we all do. And generally, they don't do very much, and we all catch them all the time. But I understand that coronavirus is the name of the family. COVID-19 obviously is a particularly nasty one, and it can have pretty nasty complications, particularly in certain types of people. But I still think it's my understanding. Again, the statistics that show, even from the Diamond Princess, 80% of the people who had it had barely any symptoms at all. They just felt it as a bad cold. It starts in the nose, it moves to the throat. For some people, it can move into the lungs, and you get a bit of a cough. But it still presents as a cold for most people. Obviously it can get a lot worse, but it's quite possible a lot of people have had it and not realized that they had it, because they just thought they had a normal cold. But there again, I could be wrong about that, and maybe I am understating it. Tai Nakamura, hey, good to see you. Thanks for the hello. Definitely repeating itself. What's repeating itself? Who knows? I will not read back all the comments, because that will get weird deja vu. The stream seems to be repeating itself. Anyone else? Maybe I'm just repeating myself. Who knows? Maybe you're getting deja vu about me reading about your deja vu. I do not know. Quint Rankin, but it's possible. Mr. Cordy Chep. For Mr. Cordy Chep, every show is a new adventure. And Temiko, I'm glad to see that it is okay for you as well, and welcome to the show. Good to see you, as well as Barry Bonds. Long time no see. Well, good to see you as well. And some of you are seeing me perhaps in loops more than I believe that's correct, Mr. Cordy Chap. Quint, please tell me what lottery numbers to select. I'll put them in right now. Wing Star, good to see someone from New Jersey. Welcome. I hang out every day with a New Jersey lawyer with no mob affiliations. It's amazing. So anyway, good to see someone from New Jersey. I feel quasi married to the place. So must be early in the morning there. So So yes, fewer and fewer Japanese want to see the world, and why would they? It's a scary place. This is actually not connected to everybody being afraid to travel because of COVID-19. It's an Economist article pointing out that Japanese, although Japan has one of the best passports, 191 countries you can visit without the need for a visa to go if you're on a Japanese passport. So Japanese are welcome everywhere. But they're doing it less than they used to, and this is something I think that's happened in my lifetime. I think it was still the image of tourists. Whenever you had a movie and you wanted to put tourists, they were always Japanese tourists, often with cameras and whatever, sort of huddled together wearing nice, new, well-pressed clothes or whatever. And I learned Japanese in New Zealand to get a part-time job looking after Japanese tourists. So certainly it is funny how Japanese seem to be less interested in traveling now, and I don't know exactly what the reasons for that are. There is certainly a perception. I've given my thoughts on this before. One being that such a book. Let's start again. Why not? Wing star, leave the gun, take the cannoli. I like it. I'm not going to read that anymore, but that's funny. So why are Japanese not traveling as much? Well, I can only speculate. I've always speculated, actually. I think part of it's the burden of success. It's like, why are people moving to Tokyo? Because it's awesome. Why, people. Japan was a country enamored with the rest of the world, and it was trying to catch up for a long time. Then it had this war, and then it had this sort of economic collapse, and then it had this bubble where it was growing rapidly. But it was successful as an exporting country because the Japanese yen was so cheap, which meant that things that were made in Japan were cheap, but people from Japan didn't have spending power abroad. And it wasn't really until the 80s that the Japanese yen came up sufficiently that Japanese could travel abroad and actually have a good time traveling. So all of a sudden everybody, elderly, young, everybody started cashing in the Japanese economic miracle in the 80s and 90s, and they started traveling like crazy, and they became the world's most famous sort of tourists. And I don't know, and also before that it was always sort of seen, I think the idea of studying abroad was seen as kind of prestigious. It was still linked with a living memory to the idea of the original people who went and basically studied with the aliens more or less when Japan opened up. And there was still very much firmly embedded in Japanese culture, particularly with the losing the war and whatnot, the idea that the best way to be successful in Japan was to learn and to bring knowledge in. Certainly what's happened in the 90s with the collapse of the bubble is one, I think Japanese don't have the same sort of complex towards the rest of the world that they used to have. It's not that they have a superiority, they just don't. They're just not quite feeling as far left behind and urgently needing to catch up, perhaps as people 30 years ago did. I think the other thing is, frankly, that they achieved a measure of success. The reason I'm here in Japan, the reason many people come to Japan, is that we look at Japan as a place that's done really, really well. We come here to look at the country that's safe and clean and modern and advanced, and these are all things that Japan aspired to be and wasn't for a long time, and it became. And I think Japanese know this themselves. So, essentially, if people are coming to Japan because it's modern and clean and safe, then what is the rest of the world to Japan? And on top of that, yes, what people talk about that they can't speak English and whatnot, that is also, of course, a thing. Indeed, Aaron. But that was always the case before. But I think the urgency of learning English in order to better yourself, in order to get a job at a prestigious trading company, those sort of jobs are not as attractive anymore. Japan has perfectly good jobs that don't require any speaking of English. The idea that the idea of the employment rat race, that your whole future is determined by whether you get into a good company, which can be determined by going to a good overseas university. That's all sort of gone. People are much more content nowadays to have contract jobs or to do startups on their own. The idea that success is through exporting. I mean, the Japanese yen has gone up sufficiently that the domestic market has become much more of a thing. Japan is no longer a fully export-driven economy. Looking at how to sell to the rest of the world is a key to success. So I think all the motivators that motivated people, Japanese people, to travel a lot up until 20 years ago, I think have fallen away. And in a way, Japan's become kind of a victim of its own success. People are comfortable, they're happy, and that's a good thing. I think that's what countries should aspire to be. it's a little bit of a shame, I suppose, that that sense of adventure that comes with hunger is perhaps now gone, but it certainly is true. I mean, hungry is not really a word I would describe many modern young Japanese, or even frankly all that curious. It's sort of nice to go on a tour safely and come back. But there again, I think as well, it's also just a generational thing as well. People see that that's something, these package tours are something that their parents and grandparents did. Young people, when they travel nowadays, I think they're much more independent minded, they're much more willing to backpack. They're always backpacking, Japanese. Yeah, I don't know. I think the culture is changing a lot, and this is just a natural part. And frankly, I think it's another byproduct of Japan's success. This is the problem. I think it's the circle of life that you can be successful at something, and it can, have this sort of unintended consequence that people don't travel as much anymore. So the big story this week was on Thursday night the Japanese school year. The Japanese school year, as well as the fiscal year, as well as everything else, goes on a cycle of April 1st through to March 31st, of course. Having April 1st as a really important economic and social date in Japan, of course, raises problems for people as Westerners, because there are a lot of big announcements that often happen on April 1st that you always worry about twice when you're in Japan. However, this is a thing that happened. Right now, the Japanese school year is oriented so that there is a spring vacation that comes up typically for most schools from mid-March, from about March 15 until March 31st. And then everyone starts the new school year in April. However, with coronavirus or COVID-19 going around like crazy, just in the day of déjà vu, I just repeated myself. Maybe I did repeat. Well, anyway, I'm here, so welcome to the future, Odie Jr. So at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday night, which I did just say a couple of minutes ago, that is not déjà vu, don't worry, that's just me trying to think through all the things I want to say and organizing it as a stream of consciousness. I announced that although we had 2.5 weeks, actually 2 weeks and 1 day left of the school year, and in spite of the fact that only 37 people have COVID-19 in Tokyo, most places don't even have any patients at all, he said all of a sudden, nationwide, all schools, elementary, middle, and high school, will close after Friday. The school years will be over, and instead they're going to have instead of a 2-week vacation, there'll be a 4-week spring vacation, so 2 extra weeks, and it's an effective way to get kids out of schools and to minimize the risk of community spread. They did make a point, however, of saying that daycare for small children and after schools, which are typically used for kids with working parents during vacations, as is the case in my case, will remain open for those who need them, which I think was a practical step to consider people who, for example, working parents that don't have the option and need some place to be able to put their kids. It'll be less kids in after schools than there will be obviously in full public and private schools. But he announced basically with not even 1 day's notice. It was basically the night before, and we were getting confused messages from the school and from the after school that my son had signed up for the spring vacation, all on this Thursday night, saying, hey, you want to spend a ton of money? We'll offer more extended vacation programs for your kid. Which we took. I mean, I can and will work from home, but I want to have all the options, and honestly, he's going to be bored sitting here with me, because I do actually work when I work from home. So, we signed him up for those, although it's going to be a lot of extra money. And the school had no idea what to do, and I must admit, for kids who are facing graduation and stuff like that, all the plans to do that over the next 2 weeks were suddenly cut short, and they were told, hey, end of your school year, or end of your school in some cases. So it was a big deal. Of course, it also put school holidays are enough of a burden on parents, let alone with this. However, I think when you consider that Japan cannot seal off its cities in the way that China can, which I did also say a couple of minutes ago, that's not déjà vu. I think this is one of the few things that the Japanese government has some measure of control over. By the way, the Japanese government does not control schools. They actually, it's actually the local boards of education. They actually choose syllabus, they choose textbooks, they choose the timing of the school year. However, the government has indirect influence on the school boards in those schools, and when they said, hey, this is a national public health emergency, shut down all schools, Although there was a lot of people who complained about it. They said it was, give us some notice, this is ridiculous. They also said, why are you commanding this when there aren't even people who have it in many prefectures? Which was kind of a giveaway that maybe the government was assuming it was actually much more widespread than the numbers reflect. It was sudden, but to me it was kind of like it makes sense. It's probably the best thing that they could do. Beyond that, they've already been pushing companies to use work from home. However, this kind of forces the issue, I suppose, if kids are going to be at home rather than doing it voluntarily. And the idea is it is trying to cut down and minimize people being in situations around lots of people. The cases where it has been noted to be spreading right now, for example, where infected people have gone to gyms, this kills me. I really like going to the gym. But right now, with everything being shut down, I'm being told I can't go to the gym, so I'm just trying to eat less. But daijoubu. Yes, indeed. So, yeah, the government's saying basically they want, for the next month, they want large events that, other than political fundraisers, which apparently have still been happening. Today was the Tokyo Marathon, record-breaking time for it. But that was shut down except for 200 runners. But for most corporate events, like recruiting events and so on, they're saying please shut them all down. Just spend a month where they won't go full Wuhan on the situation. They won't lock everyone in their apartments, but they're asking everyone as much as they can practically do to try working from home, to try avoiding going on crowded trains, which I'm doing. I'm still using the Yamanote line. I'm considering using my bicycle. The weather's getting better. I've got a pretty long ride. If I do it, about an hour long ride, I'd much rather spend an hour on the train than an hour on a bicycle going across Tokyo. But I might make a nice video. I might do that. Who knows? But Lysander 45, same situation. Sucked ass with the gyms. I'm not saying that it sucked ass that the gyms are closed for a month because you gain 2 kilograms, and that's what I'm facing here as well. I'm hoping that doesn't go on for too long. I'm wondering as well, how are they going to measure that it's actually done better? That it's actually gotten better, given that they're not really testing everybody in the first place. I'm hoping that we can just get to April and say, hey, look, doesn't seem to be spreading anymore. Go about your business again as per normal, but it's not really clear how this is going to resolve or how long this is going to go on, other than we're probably just going to naturally finish, the cold season. I don't know. But that is the thing that's happening. That is the big news story of the week. This happened. I started seeing on like Friday. First of all, there was the rush on all of the masks everywhere. I don't understand why you do the rush on toilet paper. I heard people saying that when the masks were gone, people wanted to use the toilet paper to make mask paper, to get like a material, to get a normal sort of material-based mask, and to put toilet paper in as like an exchangeable filter. I don't see how that would work. I think isn't toilet paper too crumbly for that? You put that against your mouth, it'd just like disintegrate in your mouth. I've heard that some people get diarrhea as symptoms from this, or that there are some cases in the Diamond Princess had that. I don't know if that's what they're expecting, but the idea of suddenly doing a rush on this, by the way, also happened on the nuclear thing, which is another thing I wanted to mention. For all of the global panic and weirdness, including this, that is happening with this case, the difference between this and the Fukushima thing, apart from the fact that this has actually killed people and Fukushima did it, it killed people from stress, and that stress was caused by the panic more than the actual radiation from the reactor. I was here the entire time being told that you're going to die, you're going to kill your family. It is amazing how much more chilled you can be during a crisis when you don't have politicized anti-nuclear hippies deciding to terrify people as part of their political agenda. When everyone is affected by it, it suddenly makes you more receptive to logical information, even though people, well, maybe not in every case, I'm showing a picture of that and saying people are more reasonable. They're obviously not all the time. But I do think that people, it's very easy when you're, living somewhere 10,000 miles away and you don't like Japanese people very much to begin with, perhaps you're a little bit racist and you've got you consider yourself an anti-nuclear warrior, that you can make up all sorts of lies that everyone is going to get cancer and die in Tokyo, and say that day after day, and it's pretty stressful to deal with the people who are dealing with that, much worse than the actual radiation. But yeah, the situation where everyone's kind of facing it the same, this is much better. I'll take a nuclear accident, well, I don't know, in terms of risk to my health, I think the nuclear accidents are arguably better compared to this, and certainly, I don't know, it's kind of funny. I was actually so put off by the anti-nuclear activist reaction to Fukushima, and the lies that people told or were willing to say around that just to push their agenda. It actually made me pro-nuclear. I was more anti-nuclear before Fukushima than I am now. Just pretty much out of resentment of all the liars in the anti-nuclear movement, and that's pretty much what it was. And of course the fact that climate change is out of control, and that's the only meaningful solution for it. And again, people aren't talking about that enough. But you come back to this, although people are doing silly things, and the stocks will come back, the government's saying, people, please don't be stupid, and I'm not worried about this at all, and I don't think anyone should be. There's no point to hoarding toilet paper, it's just stupid. But I still think things are a lot more settled in this case, which is good. The Japanese government is preparing a committee which is going to advise small businesses on keeping foreign talent. Really curious what they're going to say. The details were not clear on this. This one's still free to view. I think I can log in if I need to, but they've got a program, so they're going to figure out how to get highly skilled foreign nationals who have graduated from Japanese universities, so not getting qualified people from overseas, but securing local talent. But I guess small companies don't really understand how visas work, and hiring practices or whatever. But many companies have said they're unclear on how to create optimal work environments for foreign recruits. I've often been the only gaijin in the village in many small, medium-sized companies. And that's a thing, and honestly, people are so completely clueless about this. I'm not sure, and honestly, the Japanese government is the last thing that I would trust to come up with good advice. Everybody go pay Rochelle Kopp or Japanese government. Get Rochelle Kopp to make you a manual and go out and explain to these companies, again, how to not be stupid with foreigners. That's flippant. There are genuine cultural gaps and issues with that. But again, I think what Japanese employers need to understand with foreign employees, it's hard, but when everyone that you've ever dealt with has been Japanese, you expect that people, it's the same everywhere all over the world. You don't realize until you encounter a different culture, you don't really realize what your own culture is. So when you've only been dealing with people who are Japanese culture, who have been growing up in senpai kohai systems and playing baseball and in Japanese baseball teams and whatever, and have this mentality of how bosses and employees work, it's not until you deal with someone that hasn't been through that you realize that your system even exists. You just assume the whole universe thinks the same as you. So this is a problem. I was being a bit flippant before. You can't see what you can't see, and it's really hard when you're dealing. It's really hard for both the first foreign employees, which I've been, as well as the Japanese employees, to figure out, where you're looking at each other like the other people are morons. And it can be really stressful and really difficult, and Japanese companies are running into this. Again, the Japanese government is the least trustworthy organization to be able to help overcome that, but at least they're aware that it's a problem, so that's a pretty good thing. Olivia D, bike replaces gym, probably a cool video out of it, win-win indeed. I was actually thinking I could do maybe Tikyo Sam. I've seen he does videos with the motorcycle helmet on, where he talks where he's on the motorcycle. One, you get a great video and it's actually kind of cool, but when you're on a bicycle, you don't even wear helmets in Tokyo. It would be windy, so I'll think about that. But certainly, yes, you do get nice little videos. I used to do that. I used to commute to work with the bicycle camera on, and I'd speed it up and put music over it. That was kind of fun. But anyway, I thought this video would be short. This is something that happened in Japan this week. Big news. No, it's not. This is from a channel called Extra History or Extra Credits on YouTube. And I just wanted to share it because I love documentaries. I love news, obviously, and I love following documentary-oriented content on YouTube. And I really like this channel. It breaks down sort of interesting episodes in history and into like telling a story kind of perspective about interesting and obscure and sometimes famous episodes in history. Normally they've got these sort of, you can listen to it purely as a podcast, but it's animated as well, and the animations help. And they tell these sort of stories normally in 5 episodes of about 10 minutes each, talking about different episodes in history. And I've been following this for about a year, and I love this channel. But of all the things that I've watched, the Haitian Revolution story, they've just finished it. It was like 5 episodes, I think. To me, was actually one of the most interesting, crazy stories I've actually heard of this whole thing. Yes, Aaron, do I have Twitter? Please share. My Twitter is the same as my YouTube channel. It's Hiko Simon. You can see it there in the comments. Hey, check out too. Good to see you. I don't know if you're asking about that to me, Aaron, but that's it if you're interested. So yeah, this was just super cool. And I don't know if one, I recommend the channel, and one also just look at anything on the channel. It's great. But this series on the Haitian Revolution, it's a really interesting country that's been through a lot of stuff. So yeah, that's super cool. Aaron, good to know you. Good to see you on Twitter. And some better news from Tokyo. I'm almost desperate for non-COVID-19 related news. I saw this today. That was cool. So there are already some sakura that are out early. Full bloom, real bloom in Tokyo should start in about mid-March. Probably around March 22 will be the main time for that. Right now the YouTube Hanami is still on, although I guess a lot of people will probably not be traveling. But Zach, if he's still there in the comments, Phoenix787, he is the main organizer of it, so it'll be in Yogi Park as always, and check out the Facebook for that. But yeah, you'll be able to see lots of those suckers there, and I will probably make an appearance if I get a pass and if things do not get crazier than they are. But yes, indeed, that is pretty cool. I just marked myself, that's right. That's how I roll. I think that should be the last story for today. Yeah, NHK. Yeah, that's not showing anything there, but you see down the bottom, plus.nhk.jp. NHK is about to start simultaneously broadcasting all of its TV channels on the internet, which you'll be able to watch on mobile, on PC, on tablet. I love NHK, especially I think having a kid, you start to appreciate the content, and I was paying the fee anyway, so you might as well get value for money out of it. To me, I've really gone off commercial Japanese TV. It's just the same talent all over and over doing the same stuff. NHK produces great documentary shows, great travel shows, the news show. I actually find the news on it to be really good quality, and I enjoy what I get for my money out of it. So the fact that it is about to become available, simultaneously broadcast and available on mobile, and the fact that I'll be able to watch NHK News at 7 on the train on the way home and stuff like that, I can't wait. It's going to make me better informed for this, because I've really fallen out of the habit of watching the news every night, which used to make the show a lot easier to do. Temiko, I met 2 other people who have said that they love NHK. People don't like paying the NHK broadcast fee. They don't like the NHK collectors, but NHK itself is pretty cool. I'm actually really excited about this. If you're in other countries and you want to watch it, the bad news is that it will be on a they'll need to verify that you're paying your NHK fee. You'll need to create a login name based on your NHK account fee paying thing. So in a way, it's kind of a sneaky way. They're offering all this extra convenience of having this is available for streaming, but at the same time they're only going to let you see it if you're actually paying the NHK fee. All the more reason for me to actually want to sign up and get my money's worth out of it. Although I think the other thing is that they're planning to charge everyone who has the internet an additional broadcasting fee. It has grabbed attention here, by the way, that Boris in the UK is talking about actually making BBC user pays based rather than based on a broadcast fee. Something which a lot of people see as possibly being a prelude to doing the same thing with the NHS, which is a little bit controversial, obviously. But people who don't like the NHK in Japan are looking at what's happening in UK right now. But for me, I'm happy to pay the fee, and I'm happy to actually see the content, and it'll be more accessible this way. So that's pretty cool. And that's the end of the show. 5 minutes left. I haven't done a tune in a while. I'm not really set up for it right now, and I wasn't planning to do that, but I could do that. But you know what? It's nearly midnight here. I've got to go to work tomorrow, and I started the show late, so I think I'm going to finish it early tonight. So thank you all for joining me. I'm sorry I had a acidy, sandy voice, but to YY I do my best, and like I say, try to think of it as a sexy news jazz, or maybe not sexy news jazz, maybe dorky jazz, acid sand. Go for that. And everybody else, thanks for joining. Especially, I started late, so I do appreciate that you all came on regardless of that. Do keep watching the news. Do Deja Music. Indeed, I'll get to it sometime when I get to do a show a little bit earlier one night. But good to see you all. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter. Really not really active on Facebook, honestly. Twitter is better, at Makiko Simon. If you want to follow the news stories that I share on the show, I share those and more throughout the week on Twitter, as well as share random thoughts and get into conversations. Have a good week. Take care. Try not to catch a cold. And see you next week. Boom, boom. Peace.